We'll start with Sanjeev and then follow in this natural sequence. The speakers will share with you their experiences and their messages, plus or minus 7 to 8 minutes, and then it will be followed by a Q&A. Let's dive right into it. Sanjeev. So Sanjeev is an African Finance Corporation Executive Director for Financial Services and a board member as well. His overall responsibility in AFC includes treasury, trade finance, debt syndication, country and investor relations, and financial advisory. He has 30 years of experience in investment and fund management, private equity, and corporate finance. His forte has been to blend together global and indigenous corporates, financial investors and governments in order to develop commercially viable business and development models that leave a sustainable impact on emerging market economies. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Thank you. Good morning. Can I be heard? Yep. Is that better? Yeah. Hi. Okay. Great. I was hoping everybody would have finished their coffee, but they didn't have. Anyway, I shall kick off in any case. So thank you very, very much, everybody, for being here. And I'll try and be brief. I know I've been told I have 8 minutes, but I'll try and keep it shorter so that we have time for Q&A. But essentially, the point I really wanted to put across is that it is perplexing, to say the least, and it is certainly frustrating, if one is to be a little more controversial, when one sees what one sees on the African continent in terms of opportunities, vis-a-vis the complete lack of investor interest in exploiting and investing in those opportunities. And I say this because at the previous panel you heard, and I hope you heard carefully what the minister said and what everybody else said, that here is a continent soon to be 2 billion people, 70% of them below the age of 20. Here is a continent where anything you touch, feel and use is pretty much produced on this continent. Anywhere between 40 to 80% of all major metals and minerals are from this continent. Here is a continent where 60% of the continent is probably the answer to the world's food problems. Here is a continent which has huge amounts of green forests, which is soaking up the world's pollution, which Africa didn't create. Here is that continent. Here is a continent which needs infrastructure development. Here is a continent which needs to process and add value to its primary exports so that it can create jobs for its own people. So my mind gets very confused because the school I went to, they told me that when you see all these, you should queue up and invest. And I don't see that. And that is where my message to you is, as the custodians of pension funds in Africa. Remember, the word pensions essentially implies something very simple. It implies that you are looking after somebody's money on behalf of somebody so that that person, after the end of his or her useful life, useful employed life, there will be other uses, I'm sure, will have an income to hold his or her head high and be financially independent. That's pretty much the mission and the vision under which pension funds operate. And if that is so, then clearly there is a need for pension funds to invest in the longer term future of the continent that provides so many opportunities. It's kind of basic. It's almost a mathematical equation. It's got nothing to do with greed, fear, or guilt, all those things that make investors wake up from time to time. It's really a mathematical equation. That you want to have a stable pension one day, so invest in the future today. Simple. And in that context, investing in Africa's industrial development, investing in Africa's value-added industries which process Africa's primary exports, investing in Africa's infrastructure makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because, not because I'm saying it, because I don't expect you to believe me when I say anything, but it is because data shows, history shows, precedent shows, global economies experience shows that when you invest and develop a country's industrial and infrastructure base, you automatically improve the country's GDP. You automatically improve the country's employment base. And you automatically, therefore, improve your investment returns. Make sense? Mathematical equation so far? Because development is a function of growth. And growth for investors is a function of returns. So let's take a step back. Remember what I said, that you are the custodian of a continent's long-term savings. That's what you are, nothing else. And if that long-term savings is not going to get translated into effective capital for the continent, then essentially what you're doing is you are working against yourself. Because if you are not investing the savings into capital, the capital then leads to growth and development, and therefore that leads to investment returns, you're basically betting against yourself. And that doesn't make sense. Incidentally, I'll tell you, as AFC, I'll tell you, because we are the continent's largest infrastructure and industrial investor. We have invested across 36 countries. We have deployed more than $12 billion. We are rated A3 by Moody's. We have access to global capital markets. We raise money from global capital markets regularly and invest in Africa and provide good returns to them. The data is there. As a matter of fact, the actual risk experience in Africa is perception-wise worse than the actual returns. The point I'm trying to make here is that here am I representing an African institution investing in Africa, raising money all the time from global markets, including European pension and life funds themselves, who are coming and investing alongside our projects and making the money that we are making for them. So we need to make sure that our own capital also works with us. I know there are practical issues. One is asset allocation guidelines, prudential guidelines, the fact that very often pension funds in Africa get crowded up by T-bills and the facile returns of T-bills. Also, I understand and appreciate fully that pension funds are not designed to take certain risks. It cannot take project development risk. It cannot take construction risk. But that is where multilaterals like us come in. We take those risks. We develop, we de-risk, and then we distribute. And it's that distribution side which is where we want you to come. Because, ladies and gentlemen, bottom line is, if the last 3 years has shown us anything, if anything, it is that Africa needs to bat for itself. Deliverance is not coming from outside. It has to come from within. So our capital has to work for us. You know, there's a saying, the charity begins at home, and the charity has to therefore begin at home. One final point, and I'm very gratified, and therefore it needs to be said, that as AFC, in the recent past, we have been supported, and increasingly getting supported, by Africa's pension funds. They have invested in us as an investor, and they have invested as a co-investor in our projects. And that is gratifying. But it is just the tip of an iceberg, and we need to do more. So from my point of view, thank you for the time, thank you for listening. It is nothing about greed, it is nothing about guilt, it is nothing about fear, it's a mathematical equation. You want future returns, you invest in the future. That's where it starts, and that's where it ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, to my fellow panelists. I'm going to kick off by telling you about our Africa Financial Markets Index, and I think it resonates quite well with what Sanjeev has shared with us, and speaks very much to how do we ensure that that capital, as it gets deployed into our continent, is met with a regulatory framework that speaks to the free movement of that capital. So as much as pension funds, as you've noted, may be heavily invested in government securities, but how do we ensure we deepen the trading of those government securities to provide a sort of liquidity that allows pension funds to be able to access liquidity when needed and manage risk on their portfolios across the various asset classes. And although that's not all that the Africa Financial Markets Index is about, this is an index we've been running for the last 5 years. Initially started with around 17 countries. 2022, this will grow to 26 countries. We look forward to launching it in October on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington. But the beauty of our index and what it's been able to allow us to do is to be able to benchmark the various countries that we cover against 6 key pillars that we've developed in partnership with UNFIF, who produced this report. And this has allowed us to increase the number of countries we cover and also pick up certain initiatives that these countries have taken to deepen their markets, improve access to retail investors, drive sustainability principles, develop tax frameworks and legal standards that have been able to allow for some of the deepening of these markets. And it's not to say that these markets have realized that benefit, but in many ways, the ideas behind this report and the principle behind it is to show what is the framework that will allow and enable the kind of depth that we require in our markets. Of course, we realize, and especially in the last report, some of the challenges that the different countries faced. Challenges around market depth, access to foreign exchange are still prevailing even now and across the different crises that our markets have faced. But indeed, the markets have proved resilient, and in spite of this, we've seen some real concrete steps and actions that have been taken in our different countries. Indeed, the report is not an ease of doing business report, and doesn't attempt to do that, and it doesn't attempt to argue the investment case for a particular country over another, but largely speaks to what is the key framework in these countries, what are the regulators looking to do or drive, what is the various legislation that speaks to enabling the investment environment in the different countries that we cover. And largely it becomes a conversation with the regulators in these different markets, and that's actually what we have seen as we publish these reports. We see various regulators reach out to us, various regulators actually taking part in the launching of the report, whether it's the central bank, whether it's capital markets authority or the securities exchanges in these different markets. They actively participate in it, and it's something that resonates with them. And increasingly what we're seeing is in between the reports, they reach out and speak to us, speak to UNFIF, and we encourage them to engage with UNFIF because we want to maintain the independence of the report. beauty of these master agreements, whether it's the JIMRA or the GMSLA, is that they are standard legal frameworks that are well understood by investors out there. And the adoption of these frameworks makes it easy for them to understand what legal framework am I operating under when I invest in this market, and what can I expect as far as the security around my investment, the counterparty risk that I'm taking, which largely serves to addressing a lot of that perception or misconception around risk on our continent, but largely around deepening, particularly the secondary markets and trading in various securities that are out there. What we have seen over the past 5 years is that particular countries that have been able to do this quite well, and I note today in particular Uganda and Ghana. And if I look a little closer as to what some of these countries have done and how they rated and performed in our index on this particular pillar, we saw that last year Ghana and Nigeria equaled South Africa as far as performance, and we saw Mauritius and Uganda closely followed. And there are specific actions that we noted in particular that were taken in Ghana and Uganda, and some of it was following the creation of a report and the focus that the various regulators in these markets have picked up, reached out to the likes of Frontier, and started to have those conversations around what they can do to improve their local framework. If I look at Uganda and some of the specific actions they've taken, we noted that in late 2020 they enacted the National Payment Systems Act, which included a dedicated section on collateral arrangements and recognizing the validity and binding nature and enforcement of close-out netting provisions. We've also seen that the Bank of Uganda is developing explicit netting legislation under ISDA and JIMRA agreements, and further to this, they've also commissioned ISDA opinions on netting and insolvency regimes to further enhance the legal framework. It's a big piece of work that we see movement in particular in countries like Uganda, and these actions serve to give investors comfort in terms of investing in these markets, and the freer movement of capital and the security of that capital, which is absolutely essential. For Ghana, we've also noted similar actions. They too have not only recognized ISDA and JIMRA, but also there's a wide adoption of the GMSLA, which extends to securities lending, whereas the JIMRA covers repo transactions. And we've also seen the Bank of Ghana issuing notices recognizing netting transactions under global standard documentation. Because it's one thing to sign these agreements as financial institutions, but obviously the legal framework needs to be able to recognize the agreements in a credit event. And certainly further legislative actions they've taken to further embed these within their legislative framework. And on top of that, they've also, like Uganda, commissioned ISDA opinions on their legal regimes. So I hope this gives you a flavor of what is the idea behind the PIAFrica report. Like I said, we'll be launching another report in October this year. This will be our 5th report. We continue to see wider recognition of the report, and indeed our mission has always been to just be part of that conversation and part of that deliberation that starts to see regulators being able to benchmark themselves with different countries being able to benchmark their local financial markets to see how we actually improve the environment for prospective investors and allow the movement of our capital, not just from external to internal, but within our markets, the capital that we're holding, the savings that we are managing, as Sanjeev so clearly highlighted. I think this is the power of the report and the benefit of the report in driving that conversation across the financial markets. I'd like to thank you all for your time and look forward to our conversations. Thank you.
I would like to invite Dr. Mohammed Omran from Egypt to please join us and to deliver his opening remarks. Thank you.
Very good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with you. I think it has been a while. I have been in Mauritius like 4 years ago. Then we stopped traveling for a couple of years and then we resumed traveling again. So I'm very pleased to be here today with you. As I was hearing in the first couple of sessions about the importance of the private pensions in Africa and how it could have an impact on long-term investment and how it could have an impact on sustainability. Actually, for Egypt, the Financial Regulatory Authority is the single regulator for the non-bank financial institutions. So in reality, we are regulating the capital markets, stock exchange, insurance sector, pension funds, mortgage finance, leasing, factoring, microfinance, as well as consumer finance. So in reality, this is like a single regulator for the entire MFIs. And the pension fund is one of the sectors in which the Financial Regulatory Authority of Egypt is taking care of. In reality, we are discussing and we know now in the parliament about it's a unified insurance law, including the pension funds. And when I look to the latest development of the pension fund, in reality, we have around 670 pension funds under the FR regulations. And what we care about is about the investments, return, risk, sustainability, as well as governance itself. Several years ago, the investment channels and investment policies voted by the FRA was clearly towards the engagement of investment in risk-free investment. So actually, the 90+% of the assets under management for the pension fund is invested in treasury bonds and treasury bills, which is 100% secure, around 5-6% in deposit banks, and very few, around 2% on the capital market. In reality, we are putting a minimum for the risk-free investment, but there is no maximum for that. And in the meantime, for the risk investment, we have a maximum of 20% actually. In reality, recently we were engaged in a very healthy discussion with the pension fund manager to convince them to move a little bit slightly from the around 100% or 98% secured investment to take a little bit a sort of risk. For this reason, instead of having a minimum for the risk-free investment, we did decide at the board of directors of Financial Regulatory Authority, with a discussion with the pension fund manager, is to put a minimum risk investment. So in reality, we were asking them to have at least 10% of their assets under management to be invested in listed securities in the stock market in Egypt. When I was looking to the discussion about this agenda is about the offshore. Actually, the current rules and regulations brought by the FRA prohibited the pension funds to invest outside Egypt. We are talking about 120 billion Egyptian pound assets under management, but all of them, according to our rules and regulations, is invested in Egypt. The third issue is about the alternative investment. I understand this is became like a new trend when we're talking about having this pension fund investing in real estate funds or private equity or venture capital. And this is in reality something also we need to encourage, given the fact that we believe that investing in alternative investment will have better impact on sustainability and economic growth. And one of the other issues that we are keeping discussing with the entire sector of non-bank financial institutions, including the pension fund, is about the sustainability and climate change, in which you understand that Egypt is hosting the COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh this November, and I think the financial sector has a very big impact of how to achieve the sustainable development goal, as well as the financial related, the related climate financial disclosure. So the issues about how pension fund could have an impact on the agenda for sustainable development goal, as well as the climate change. In reality, with this mobilization of resources, in which many of the estimation is that the entire world needs at least around $100 $100 billion every single year to make sure that from now until the year 2030 to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the issues is how to make sure that these funds will be mobilized from the conventional economy to what you can call the green economy, or to the friendly environmental kind of investment. And we are the Egypt, and according to the Board of Directors decrees regarding the sustainability and the climate-related financial disclosure, we issued 2 decrees for our non-bank financial institutions. First one is about the sustainability-related financial disclosure, in which they have to disclose about the ESG sometimes beginning of the year 2023, and this is going to be mandatory. It's now a voluntarily basis now, but it's going to be mandatory starting from January 2023. The other thing is about the climate-related financial disclosure, but because this is a very comprehensive and difficult one, we have a threshold delivered for funds as well as companies in which they have to accommodate the FRA requirements. I just would like to share with you that the recent global baseline for sustainability and climate-related financial disclosure. In 4th of November, during the COP26 in Scotland, the IFRS, which is the International Financial Reporting Standard, they announced that they have new board. It's called IWSSP. The IWSSP stands for the International Sustainability Standard Board. And the reality is that given the pressures from the investment community, from the G7, G20, the IOSCO, the International Organization for Security Commissions, and others, they were looking for a global baseline for sustainability reporting. So after this board has been initiated last March, I think 21st, 22nd of March, there was 2 exposure reports issued by IWSSP. One is about the sustainability-related financial disclosure, and the other one is about climate risks and opportunities. And they are giving the stakeholders a deadline until the end of this month, exactly 29th of July, just to get the feedback. And I understand that they are looking for a global baseline in which the companies should disclose about sustainability and about climate risk and opportunities. And I understand also it might be required as a part of the annual financial reporting is that companies and funds and others should disclose this, and they have a global baseline, so they could have some sort of comparability among the different disclosure and about the reliability about them. The issues about the disclosures regarding sustainability and climate is very much eminently for the pension funds. Pension funds, they are mobilizing the resources, they are investing in companies, they are investing in different asset classes, and I think one of the issues that we are directing our pension funds is try to direct the investment in high quality sustainable companies, in high quality sustainable financial assets, in assets that is friendly in terms of environment, in terms of social, in terms of governance. So the issues about the investment channels and investment strategies for pension fund is not only left for the pension fund manager to decide, but there are some rules and regulations set by the Financial Regulatory Authority that put the framework of how to direct such kind of investment to support sustainability and climate risks and opportunities. And in the meantime, we are putting some rules and regulations concerning the governance, how these funds are managed, because we need to make sure about issues related to the risk management, things related about the liquidity of the asset under management, things related to the composition of the board of directors of these pension funds, as well as there is issues related to how to make sure that there is a separation between the chairman of the board as well as the CEO. So the reality is that we are, the new law that we are discussing now in the board composition of these pension funds, as well as to have that the majority of the board should be non-executive members. In reality, what's happening now is that the one who is managing the pension funds in Egypt are the members themselves. So no matter about the quality, no matter about the knowledge, no matter about the experience, they are managing these funds. And we did find that there are many there are many abusing transactions happening because of the lack of knowledge, lack of experience, or even because of the conflict of interest of how to manage this fund. So in reality, the governance is one of the things that the Financial Regulatory Authority in Egypt is taking care of that. And when I look even to what's happening in Europe and other rest of the world, there is a lot of concern about the quality of the board of directors of this pension fund and how to make sure that the things related to the conflict of interest, because in many cases this manager would like to take a higher risk to achieve a higher return in order to get a better remuneration and better compensation. And this is one of the things that we are keen to handle in Egypt, because we would like to make sure that these pension funds serving the members, in reality, return is very much needed, but in the meantime, we need to make sure that risk is calculated and is managed, and we do not need this pension funds to cause any systematic risk in the market at large or systematic risk to their own members. In all, we are very keen to have a better rules and regulation, and when we do that, we are not doing that by the regulatory authority itself, but we engage our stakeholder in a separate meetings and in a stakeholder discussion, and we make sure that they understand what we are looking for, but the reality issues related to that, as I was mentioning, risk management, liquidity, risk and return, sustainability, and climate risk and opportunities is one of the top concerns of the Financial Regulatory Authority of Egypt. Thank you, Chairman.
Hi, sorry, I lost you for a minute. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mohammed, for giving us a bit of insight into what's happening in Egypt. I've noticed some points, and I would like to ask some follow-up questions shortly. I now would like to invite Ibrahim from PENCO Nigeria to also give us his opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. My brothers and sisters in the pension industry and cousins in the alternative space. This is my first time in Mauritius, and Mauritius is a fine country. I'm really happy to be here and share some perspectives from Nigeria and what is happening in terms of regulation. Actually, when I was listening to my brother, Dr. Mohammed, I almost felt like just sitting down, because most of the things he was talking about were actually things we were also talking about, considering in Nigeria. So what it says is Africa is one, and we think alike, and most of the things being done across Africa are similar. By way of introduction, I'd like to just give a brief on the Nigerian pension system. In 2004, there was a pension reform. Before, we had a defined benefit system, and the reform brought in a defined contributory system, which is the DC, privately managed assets. The contribution rate is 18%, 10% the employee contributes 8%. Currently, we have 20 pension fund operators licensed by the Commission. We have 4 custody companies that keep custody separate from management. And we also have some legacy schemes, that's employer schemes that were in existence before 2004. So there are 6 mostly multinational oil companies that manage assets in-house. Assets under management is about 14.2 trillion naira, which is roughly about $34 billion. And in terms of demography, about 75% of contributors are below 40 years. In terms of global trends, no doubt the rise of defined contribution globally, schemes are moving towards DC. The OECD has acknowledged that although pension systems are skewing towards DC, in Africa, most of them are in traditional assets, which is bonds and equity. So, for example, in Nigeria, about 85% of assets are in mostly fixed income securities. In terms of global development, I will not bore you. In the previous session, there was talk about COVID, talk about the Ukraine war and how it has impacted supply chains, it has caused disruptions, recession, and most importantly and recently, high interest rates, inflation and high interest rates. So I just want to talk briefly on the Nigerian context. Prior to this, Nigeria has been also struggling with insecurity. There have been spate of kidnapping, which has disrupted farming in the north, predominantly where food is being produced, which has created food insecurity. Oil theft also is on the rise. There are reports that in Q1 2021, about $1 billion was siphoned out in terms of theft of oil. Now, bring the issue of subsidies. The government is struggling to pay subsidies. In 2022, it's been estimated subsidies of about 4 trillion naira, close to $10 billion will be paid as subsidy. So you bring in all these pressures on the government is also impacting the economy. In terms of FX, capital importation has gone down by 60%. And this has impacted the capital market. And like I told you, predominantly pension assets are invested in bond, the traditional assets. So definitely, obviously, there is need to look elsewhere to diversify the portfolio. So we're looking at alternatives. But alternatives, there are challenges. Some of these challenges I will touch on briefly. I know there are a lot of issues around alternative investments, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. But for Nigeria, I will talk about the issue of short-termism. That is, the operators, instead of pension assets, normally are long-term in nature, but most of the operators are short-term. What is the reason for this? The retirement savings accounts are individualized, so people see these as bank accounts. So the attitude is, I have a bank account, I have a pension account, I should also be checking my pension account every day, every week, and any adverse movement creates a reaction. And this prompts the operators, instead of, and given the structure of the economy, instead of looking longer term, they play more towards the short end of the market. Another reason is the culture of cautiousness brought about by regulation, which is partly due to the regulator being very, very conservative, with good reason, given that it's the contributor that bears the risk. So with the pension reform in 2004, there was very, very stringent rules in order to safeguard. But the time, I think, has come for those regulations to begin to open up to allow other diversification and other assets to be invested. Another issue is also a dearth of suitable products soften some of the stringent requirements in the regulation. There's also the challenge of skills. Skills in doing adequate due diligence. When you talk about alternatives, some of these are complex, such as infrastructure. The capacity within the industry is not there, so the idea is to leverage on multilateral development organizations that can provide technical skills in doing due diligence, credit wrapping, and other forms of activities that will provide comfort to pension funds. In terms of policy response, what has the regulator done? PENCOM in 2008 introduced what we call the multi-fund structure. The idea is to create several funds that will cater to the individual risk profile of contributors. The hope was it would aid in developing alternatives. Because if you have someone who is going to work for 20, 30 years, and you have aggregated them in one fund, they can afford to take more risk and for longer. But unfortunately, from 2018, it was launched in 2019 to date. This has taken off, but not to the level that we expect, and this is partly attributed to dearth of the alternative instruments and the issue of regulation. So some of these are changing. This year, we expanded the scope of private equity investing. So essentially, the operators are only allowed to invest in private equity funds, but with the new regulations, it also allows co-investing. So when they are attracting projects outside of the fund, the operators now can jointly invest in some of these projects. This provision is also being considered for infrastructure, just to broaden and widen the scope of investments in these asset classes. There are also discussions ongoing on investment in offshore. It is a big challenge currently due to the FX challenge being faced by the Nigerian government. So talks are ongoing, but we are not too optimistic about getting immediate results. But talks are ongoing because there is need to diversify outside of Nigeria. There's also talk about, we're also looking at alternatives such as commodities that are linked to global prices that would help offset some of the devaluation concerns in terms of investing 100% of the assets within Nigeria. Another initiative is active engagement. All regulators within the Nigerian space have acknowledged the need to support the pension industry. We have bodies such as the Financial Services Regulatory Coordinating Committee, which is a collection of regulators from the capital market, the insurance, the debt management office that meet to discuss issues revolving around the financial market. Infrastructure has taken center stage in discussions in this group. Now, talking about the social issues, we know what is happening with social upheaval, given what is happening in Sri Lanka and other areas. In 2019, Nigeria, the pension regulator introduced the micro pension scheme. The idea was to extend pensions to the informal sector because the informal sector constitutes a significant portion. Penetration of the formalized sector is just about 14%. 14% of about 60 million working population. The micro pension scheme is designed to be flexible, contributions are not fixed, and there are two portions. There's a contingent portion that you can withdraw, like a savings, and then there's a fixed, which is the pension. The fees are reduced, and we're also looking at innovative ways in terms of bundling incentives to attract contributors into the scheme. So in conclusion, I would say pension systems are fast evolving, and most of this trend or movement has been towards defined contributory systems in Africa. Regulations must evolve. They must evolve to support growth and development. It calls for active participation with all concerned stakeholders, all critical stakeholders. And similarly, we need to look inwards in terms of galvanizing and mobilizing local resources to develop the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Brian.
The real focus, We are here in Mauritius, but Mauritius, we say that we like to be we are part of Mauritius indeed. So we'll talk about international investment structures, especially within the context of what's happening globally, regionally, especially globally, the challenges that, insofar as geopolitical tensions are concerned, economic or environmental, etc. So in particular, we'll delve into insights into the latest updates on the Mauritius reform agenda, why Mauritius is still the ideal investment platform for Africa, so still Africa, how to set up international investment structures from Mauritius, using Mauritius, the platform, and of course allocation strategies offshore for pension funds, what they should consider. And lastly, what constitutes the Mauritius IFC stakeholder ecosystem. We'll talk especially with Yas from the banking sector here with us. So maybe I'll give a short introduction of the next speaker. So we have on board with us Maheshwar Dugakant, who is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. He's the managing director of Apex Fund Services Mauritius, Apex Mauritius, which forms part of the Apex Group worldwide, which has offices in various jurisdictions, including, in fact, New York, London, Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Ireland. Mahesh holds a number of directorships on the boards of numerous India and Africa-focused funds and companies, through which he has acquired extensive experience and knowledge on key industries in India and its principal capital markets, as well as Africa. Mahesh is also a current board member of Mauritius Finance, which is one of the sponsors here, right? The industry associated body, so in Mauritius. He has previously been the president of Mauritius Finance, right? I think he was the past president, Mahesh, for 2 years, I think. And of the executive committee of the Association of Trust and Management Committee of Mauritius, as well as the vice president of the Mauritius Society of Chartered Accountants. Quite a long introduction, Mahesh. Prior to joining Apex Mauritius, he was the group financial controller of a major listed group, so in Mauritius. So Mahesh, maybe what allows you to do, of course, I understand you have a presentation. So you will be delving into what we call the insights, the latest updates, what's happening so far as the reforms, have been on the agenda insofar as pension funds are concerned in Mauritius. So I think this is well accommodating. And of course, we'll talk a bit about the industry platform, right? Mauritius being the IFC, of substance, repute. That's why we like to say the gateway to Africa, etc. So we are part of Africa. They use us for Africa. And of course, we'll talk a bit about allocation, offshore allocation strategies pertinent to the pension funds industry, especially. So the floor is yours, Mahesh, please. I understand you have a presentation, huh?
Yes. Thank you. It's on. I need not the presentation.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Seems to work better. So let me first of all welcome all of you who are visiting Mauritius for this conference. First of all, in line with our usual version welcome, I'd like to have some sunshine for you. So we apologize about the weather for the past few days for those who have been here, but I'm sure it's going to get better over the next few days, so that you'll be able to enjoy a bit mixing business with pleasure. I'm here today, as Shamin has mentioned, just to cover a few topics in line with what has been happening over the past to give a brief overview because so much has been happening, and as we go through questions and answers afterwards, we'll be happy to cover any specific topics that any of you would want to comment and ask further. So, before getting into all this, one of the main aspects which most people are aware, which has been very topical since 2020 and finally closed in 2022 for Mauritius, had been the grey listing of Mauritius money, FATF. So during those 2 years, a number of reforms have been coming through in Mauritius in the regulatory segment to make sure that we get out of the list. And we're very happy that in February this year, we managed to get out of the list. It was one of the fastest exits, if not the fastest exit from the FATF grey list over the years. And this has been done through a lot of structural reforms, through a collaboration between the public and private sector working together in the interest of in the national interest. And where that leaves us now is in a reinforced position where we can move forward and continue to be the place to be for investments platforms into Africa. So a bit of context as well as to what happened during these past 2 years. Apex Group, we are an international group, so we service our clients in a number of countries, and during those past 2 years, a number of them, when setting up their funds and their vehicles, have come to us and also said, we cannot use Mauritius during the FATF listing because of X, Y, and Z reasons, and they wanted alternatives to go to other jurisdictions, which we helped them with. And after 2 years, I can tell you, the majority sentiment is we want to come back to Mauritius. We realize, it's when you haven't had what you used to have for a number of years that all of a sudden you realize what you've been having, and then you say, look, now we want to come back to Mauritius. We see why Mauritius was always the preferred platform. During while you're having it, you're thinking, okay, there are things that could be better, and we'll work together to do that. And in that aspect, Mauritius has kept on reforming, has kept on bringing in new legislations, new regulatory framework, new products, everything to make the jurisdiction continue to be more attractive, more relevant. As Africa is developing, Mauritius wants to develop as well and accompany the African continent as part of Africa into this growth. So what has been happening during the past 2 years? Products. My colleague Jan will give you a bit more developments into these products a bit later in his presentation. But we've had 2 very new interesting products which have come up. First of all, there has been the Special Purpose Fund. The Special Purpose Fund is a tax-neutral vehicle which has been introduced to be in line with similar vehicles which are updated in other countries, and which has come in to bridge a gap which we didn't have in Mauritius. It's not a treaty vehicle, it's just a tax-neutral vehicle, and it has come in, and it is something that we feel is going to be very useful. Then the next product, which has recently just come into the picture, is the Variable Capital Company. Now, the Variable Capital Company of Mauritius, that's going to be a really fantastic product. I can tell you, it's basically a Swiss Army knife. You will be able to do mostly anything that you think you can with it. Jan will give you a bit more details later on, but I hope that I have already gotten your appetite to know more. Regulatory aspects, what has been done as well is one of the items that the FATF highlighted was the monitoring that was required by the regulators, the Financial Services Commission, the various law enforcement agencies that we've had in Mauritius. And over the past 2 years, being an operator, I can tell you it was very hard. We've had numerous monitoring, inspections, reviews, controls to ensure that everything is up to international standards, is up to the FATF standards for Mauritius to be there where it needs to be, recognized as a very well regulated, as a competent and compliant jurisdiction. And what we've seen is this continues. As regulators, it's painful for us because we have to go to this continuous exercise of dealing with the regulator, that's something that we continue to work on, and we continue to collaborate very closely with the regulators and ensure that our client base, our investors, understand the reason why. And we've seen what is happening on an ongoing basis. A lot of other countries are coming on the grey list of the FATF, even reaching out to Mauritius to help them come out of the FATF list. Okay. The past couple of years as well have been very good in terms of technological development. COVID has been a process accelerator, as we all know. And not only the private sector, the regulated operators, but the regulator has also come out and embraced the technology platforms. The FSC, the main regulator for our sector, has come out with the FSC1 platform, whereby all applications, submissions, liaison with the regulator can be done from that platform, and which allows you to track and monitor where your applications and where your various requests are directly online. Added to that, Mauritius continues in its capacity building and quality of human resources that we have in order to be able to meet the demands of the international players who continue to use the jurisdiction. So I'll move on to my next slide, which is a bit more about the regulatory updates that have been happening during, especially since the start of the year, to continue with the trend of getting into the. I'm just mentioning here a few ones which are very topical and which may interest you. Compliance services. This is something that has become very topical. You know, in the days we used to say there's only two certainties in life, which are basically death and taxes. But I think now compliance is becoming very much a big part of that, especially in our field. But in that respect, a lot of people are coming and offering services, saying that we can help you in your compliance requirements, and it has become an open field. So the regulator has quickly stepped in to come in, bring in a format, bring in a structure within which compliance service providers can operate to ensure that whatever is being delivered to the clients, to the people who are using the Mauritian jurisdiction, is in line with international standards. Next item, which is very topical as well in those days, is virtual assets. Virtual assets, wherever you're looking, you're hearing a card of some name coming up on a very regular basis. And Mauritius doesn't want to be left behind in the curve. The Bank of Mauritius has come up with a structure, with a format. The Financial Services Commission as well, bringing in an act last year and regulations and frameworks, including AML safety guidelines around this area. So this is something which continues and it will continue to be topical in the years to come. And Mauritius is taking the lead, is taking the steps that is required to be able to get to that level very quickly as an international game. A bit more relevant to the theme of this conference is the private pension schemes rules. Okay, so the private pension scheme rules, just to give a bit of context as well, what has prompted this in Mauritius is Mauritius introduced a legislation where everybody has to contribute towards their employees' pension. So there's something which is called the PRGF in Mauritius, whereby each employer has to contribute a certain amount for its employee benefit, either to be paid to the government in a fund, or you can have a private fund and basically contribute in that private fund as long as it is approved by the regulator and it plays within the general rules of the legislation. So the rules came out to ensure that this is properly regulated, this is put in the proper format for the benefit of the employees and pension contributors. Okay. And ongoing with all this, we want, as I mentioned earlier in my first slide, what we're trying to do is get to a level of competency and resources as well to provide all these services around compliance and anti-money laundering, combat of anti-money So, as the years go by, compliance officers, money laundering reporting officers, they have to have some qualifications. They have to have some standards before being able to come into the frame and being able to be appointed in such positions. These positions are positions of responsibility, fiduciary positions. They're becoming even as relevant as positions of directors nowadays, and it is important to have a proper competency standards around those. There were some earlier, and as the years change, these are updated regularly, and Mauritius became very proactive on this, and we move quite quickly in changing these standards to be able to be again in line with best practice. Okay. The other item which I wanted to speak quickly on before in the floor to my fellow colleague is offshore allocation of strategic pension funds. Okay, this is one of the topics which was in which we wanted to cover today. And why we want to cover this as part of the Mauritius story is because Mauritius is often used as a platform for investment. And when you're looking at offshore allocation for your pension funds, I don't have to tell you. I mean, you're the experts in the field, but the items that top item that you need to really look at is governance. Okay? Governance is one of the key aspects. We have the other aspects of diversification, short-term view versus long-term view, etc. But governance is one of the key aspects that we need to look at. Mauritius has had for many years a national code of corporate governance, which has been enhanced continuously and which is applied across the financial services and regulated services industry. Mauritian vehicles are regulated. We have the Financial Services Commission, which regulates us. The banks are regulated by the Bank of Mauritius, and there are other sub-regulators which come in to ensure the framework and the governance aspects are respected. This is something which is what when we're looking at offshore allocation, because when we're looking at offshore allocation, and for our South African colleagues, it's something which is quite topical at the moment with the recent increase allowing up to 45% offshore allocation of pension funds. It is very topical because you use Mauritius to get as a platform for other funds which are invested in various projects that you want to allocate, depending on the strategies that your funds are geared towards. And the Mauritius vehicles, they're very much regulated. They very much follow a proper governance, a proper governance framework. And out of these, we get a proper tool and vehicle to be used by the pension funds or by the managers who are going to be investing for the pension funds. So that's what I wanted to mention as one of the main aspects in this segment. And in terms of the other items we can cover, we'll be happy to ask questions. I'm sure Shamina has already some questions when we'll be covering the panel. But in the meantime, I'll leave you with my other fellow panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. I think you've covered most of the questions that I would like to ask you. So you're being relieved this time, so thank you. So we've talked a bit about reforms, in alignment with international exigencies in terms of norms, standards, the products of the law, the different changes in the law, on capacity building, and ultimately, lastly, on offshore allocations is very important, so governance, etc. Before that, I would like to say on behalf of the panel here, we are missing maybe two people. One who had to attend today has excused himself. In fact, it's Vinay, I think, Budai, from the EDB. He was present in the morning and made a presentation on behalf of the EDB, but he has had to leave us, quit us very rapidly as a meeting the minister, so it's very important. So excuses from his part. And also I saw when the organizers had sent into the program, I saw that there was because we're talking about international investments, etc. So there's a part missing in terms of the stock exchange, the capital markets. So we were to have, in fact, the chief executive officer of the stock exchange of Mauritius, Sunil Benmadu, but in fact he's traveling, he's abroad. People have resumed traveling, after COVID, after 2 years being just, in confinement. So it has resumed. So maybe I'll just give just a short brief, about the stock exchange. I was part of the stock exchange at some point in time. So, the capital markets of the stock exchange, which is one of the most vibrant, not in terms of liquidity, etc. No, we are a small country, 1.3 million inhabitants. We have a stock exchange which cuts across all the various sectors of the Mauritian economy. We have international businesses which are listed. We also operating capital. We accompany clients, especially global business companies, funds, etc., to list with the Mauritian Stock Exchange. And we also have been very well on the cross-listing agenda, where we have lots of companies using Mauritius and using other exchanges like Johannesburg, Namibia. We have had talks with Kenya, with Tanzania, etc., and even on the west coast of Africa, so Cote d'Ivoire, etc. So that speaks a bit about the sort of vibrancy that of our capital markets here. So just a word about this, because I saw this link missing, and I just wanted to pop in insofar as the capital markets is concerned. But now moving on to our next speaker, just a short introduction, long introduction, Jan, on yourself. So Jan Ning, you put Mr. Jan Ning, is an executive director of Intercontinental Trust Limited. He specializes in the structuring and administration of investment funds and listed companies. He is a board member of a number of funds and listed companies in Mauritius. He was previously with Baker Tilly Mauritius and Deloitte, Luxembourg, and was trained as a chartered accountant in London. He was the treasurer of the International Fiscal Association Mauritius branch, another association of trust and management companies. He's a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and a member of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners. Jan graduated from the University of Mauritius, BSc Honours with a degree in management, and achieved a Master's in Finance, MSc, from Lancaster University. He also completed the Oxford Blockchain Strategy program outside Business School, University of Oxford. Maybe before you take the mic, Jan, I believe you have a presentation that you prepared. So I think Mahesh had conveyed before. So you would speak a bit about Mauritius being referred as a gateway to Africa, etc. So what are the sort of investment structures that we have here in our jurisdiction that we've been adding a few recently? You'll be talking about that. I think Mahesh hinted about that. So I think I'll leave the floor to you. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Charmaine. So good afternoon to you all. So it's a pleasure to be here today. I thank the organizers for choosing the right timing. I think if the event happened a month ago, we would all be legally obliged to wear masks today. So welcome for that. So today I will speak on the different investment vehicles that are available in Mauritius, so that you could structure your investments. So this is a list of all the structures that are available. So you will see there's a number of them, but I won't be able to go through each one of them because some may not be relevant or some may not be used very often. So mainly we'll be talking about funds, limited partnerships, protected sale companies, the VCC, and of course on the global business. So the main ones you need to know, because this is the base, are the GBCs, Global Business Company, and the Authorized Companies. I think, the beauty with the Mauritian jurisdiction is that you have a panoply of different entities or structures you could use, so that you can tailor-make your structures. So it's not like just some few plain vanilla structures, you can tailor-make, mix and match. And this is evolving over time, and only this year we have the variable capital companies added to that list. So going back on the global business company, so this is geared towards foreign investors. So in order to do that, the majority of the investors should be from abroad. And then the second restriction is that the business should be conducted principally outside of Mauritius. So you can't operate from a majority perspective in Mauritius. So on the global business company, so this is a tax resident company in Mauritius. So because it is tax resident, you get the benefits of all the tax treaties that Mauritius has signed with various other countries. And because it is tax resident again, you will have to pay some tax in Mauritius. So the headline rate of tax in Mauritius is 15%, but if you meet certain conditions, you can reduce it to 3%. Okay? And some of the conditions is that you need to have no substance in Mauritius, so SIGA requirements. So you need to have maybe people on the ground, maybe an office, etc. So depending on the activities, you need to meet certain conditions. And you know that the GBC also can apply for various specific licenses. So if you want to operate as a fund, as an investment manager, etc. So this is the vehicle that you will need to use. So the next one is the Authorized Company. So it is a non-resident company for tax purposes. So in order to do that, management and control should be outside of Mauritius. So you can't have like directors in Mauritius or your board taking decisions from here. And also, the majority of the business should be conducted outside of Mauritius. So, and this structure is often used, you know, by individuals or where tax treaties are not required. So now I will touch more on the type of fund structures available in Mauritius. So there is a number of them, but I will focus mainly on the closed-ended funds, which are mainly used by PE funds, and also on the open-ended funds, used mainly by hedge funds. And there are other types of funds which I will not really dig into today. So on the closed-ended fund, so I'm sure you're all aware of what that means, but in terms of the legal structures used for a closed-ended fund, the most popular one is the limited partnership, then the company structure, or a PCC. So I will go into the limited partnership. So I tried to do a diagram so that we get a bigger picture of how a structure would look like. So in the middle of that diagram, you see the fund. It is structured as a limited partnership. So all the investors are coming in from, the limited partners. And in order to make that structure work, you need to have different components. So on your right of the fund, you need to have a general partner. And normally the general partner is a company set up in Mauritius as a GDC. And you have the option for the general partner to be the investment manager or not. Sometimes the investment manager could be outside of Mauritius as well. And also, the fund may elect to decide to be tax opaque or tax transparent. So a decision that the fund would need to make. And that decision would trigger whether the general partner should be domiciled in Mauritius and tax resident in Mauritius or not. So then, of course, you need to appoint other parties like a fund administrator, a bank, which may or may not be the custodian. And normally, for those type of structures, they would invest through SPVs that ultimately invest in the different countries. And when we say SPV1, SPV2, etc., those can be structured as a GBC or as an AC, as discussed earlier. So the next one is on the open-ended funds. So it's principally used by the hedge funds. And the most common type of structures we see using them are using companies or a PCC. So again, a diagram. So this one is a bit more simple. So you have the fund in the middle, and you have the investors at the top. Again, you have to appoint a bank, if an administrator, and then you have a choice on this structure whether it is a self-managed or not self-managed. Self-managed in the sense that do you want to appoint a separate fund manager or not? Okay, so if you decide to appoint a fund manager, so it would be another entity which may or may not be Mauritius, and then you have the choice if you have an investment advisor as well. And then normally for those open-ended funds, the investments are done directly, not necessarily through an SPV. So the next one is a protected sale company. So what is that? So it is like a structure for which you have different cells. And the beauty with the cells is that it is ring fenced. So if say you have cell 1, cell B, cell 1, cell 2 and cell 3, and if for some reasons one cell were to go bankrupt, the liabilities would not overflow to the other cell. And this is particularly important when you have different investors in the different cells, because some cells may be more risky than others. And that's one of the main features of the PCC. It is registered as a single legal person. So all the cells will share the same legal person. And I think what's nice with the PCC is that, especially for groups that want to have different cells, you don't need to each time incorporate a new entity. You just add cells to an existing structure. So this would cut down on cost. So in terms of a diagram, so it's very similar to the previous one structure, but the only difference is you have the different cells. And normally you will have cell A investing in investment A, and normally because of that ring fencing, you can't really mix match those investments together, so each cell will have its own assets and liabilities. So now I come to the variable capital companies, as I was mentioning earlier. So this is something very new. It came out only in 2022. I think the interesting part of that is under a single umbrella, you could have different sub-funds and you could have different SPVs, okay, which you couldn't do under a PCC. But the thing is, under a variable capital company, you need to apply for a fund license. So not all type of activities are eligible under this. So I will give you maybe an example of how this works. So this is the variable company, which is the box in green. And so you have sub-fund 1 or sub-fund 2. So the first thing you need to set up is a sub-fund. It is mandatory to have a minimum of 1 sub-fund. So you may have sub-fund 1 or sub-fund 2 or just sub-fund 1. And then under sub-fund 1, you can have an SPV. But the SPV is within the variable capital company structure. So you don't need to set up a separate entity. And also under sub-fund 1, you would invest in sub-fund 2. So you have those cross investments that are available. And I think that the next important thing is each sub-fund or each SPV within that structure could have a separate legal personality. Okay? So meaning that each one could have its own board of directors, could have different investment strategy. Within the same VCC structure, you could have a sub-fund which is open-ended, another sub-fund which is closed-ended. So you can mix match all those strategies. So it's as if you have one umbrella for which you can put all kinds of different structures within that box, even with different strategies. Okay? And I think this is a very important structure that we have now, and especially maybe for which previously had to set up a number of entities to make the structure fully work. Under this one, you can have a single umbrella structure housing everything, which will significantly reduce the cost because you don't have to set up new ones. And secondly, in terms of administration, governance, etc., you have a single type of structure where everything is governed under one roof. Okay, so I have a table comparing some of the differences between a PCC and a VCC. So the first one is on activities. So the PCC, the permissive activities right now are the likes of asset holding, it could be an open-ended fund or a closed-ended fund, it's used by captive insurance, pension schemes or real estate development. So this is under PCC, whereas for VCC, it needs to operate as a fund. So this is a very big difference. So the second one is differences on the separate legal personality. So the APCC is one legal personality, and the VCC it has the option of the promoter whether each sub-fund or each SPV has a separate legal personality. Okay, so and those differences continue. I mentioned about you can have differences on the board, So basically, you can mix match all your requirements. It's as if for under VCC you have different types of entities, but you benefit from the economies of scale being under one roof. Okay, so I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Ladies and gentlemen, Mauritius has been hosting so many structures, creation, implementation of so many structures over the years, decades, I would say, 3 decades, and there has been quite an evolution in terms of sophistication of those structures, etc. So Jan has been stating about the VCC, the new one, right? Really more. And so anything that you like, because Jan has been resuming, quite complex, complicated. I myself, I tried to catch up a bit with Jan, was following the screen here. So you are the expert in the funds, you have the funds department just got at ITL. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to be with Jan, of course, after this session and during the day, we'd be really happy to be with you. We have also Mahesh here from Apex, a lot of structures there also. So the experts are here, right? So they are available. So before turning on to our next speaker, maybe the organizers have just hinted to me, I have one good news and one, I would say bad news, but not too good. So which one do you want, the good or the bad? The bad. No, let me give you the good first. Yeah, the good news is that you're heading, towards lunch, right? In half an hour, maybe, heading towards lunch. But the proviso, the prerequisite to heading towards lunch is to have at least 3 questions from the audience to the panelists. But it has to be shared equally. We have, I would say, 3 from my side, the right-hand side, the left-hand side, and the middle one. So at least 1 from each column. So from the right-hand side, from the left-hand side, and the middle one. So at least 1 question. If not, we'll be delayed again. They'll wait for us, we'll have to wait. So before passing on to Jan, maybe I'll just introduce Jan and then I'll pose a series of questions. So Jan Zedrago is the head of financial institutions, group in global business at ABSA Bank Mauritius, one of the sponsors here today. ABSA, one of the well known in Africa. When I think about ABSA, I think about African assets, so it's everywhere. Over the course of his career, he held several senior strategic roles in the banking and financial sector. Jan started as a chartered accountant in financial modeling programs at KPMG in London. He continued his journey with Barclays Capital and Investment Banking Division, working in the power, utilities, and infrastructure team, covering European corporate and global infrastructure funds. He has thereafter joined UBS, the largest Swiss bank, whereby he helped build a similar team while continuing his coverage, origination, and executive responsibility in infrastructure and power division, and focusing on mergers and acquisitions and public to private deals. So I have a series of questions to you, Yaz. Maybe I'll just run through rapidly, but you have a presentation, understand? It will not be on the screen, but of course I invite you to be standing here, just to be as part of my and Yaz. Right? Sure. So, sure, please, you can stand up. But my questions would be, in the midst of the challenges that we find, especially with pension funds, having to have adequate returns, balancing its risk, etc. So, what are the roles of banks, and especially Mauritius, international banks? So, what is the pertinence of having such international banks in the equation here, right? And also, what are the benefits of using banks like ABSA, for instance? And what about transactions in foreign currencies, regards to projects, funds and projects in Africa, for instance, right? And lastly, right? So maybe you speak a little about the procedures, etc., with regards to KYC, because we have to keep, Mauritius is very important. We have our reputation to protect, so we have to keep at par with international norms, international standards, with regards to compliance, etc. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think it's important to probably set the scene in terms of the pension landscape in Africa, but also globally. We are really at the crossroads today, right? In the African context, as you know, there has been, the population is still a very young population, if not the youngest population as a continent, but also facing challenges in terms of an aging population. So it's a double whammy. I think the number of over 65s over the past 2 decades has doubled or tripled on the continent. At the same time, pension funds as a group of institutional investors is the largest set of institutional investors on the continent, and therefore have a massive importance and impact in the development of Africa. But from a global perspective, I think it's no denying that we have really come at the crossroads. From a healthcare perspective, it's the first time that we can truly say in modern times that we have gone through a global pandemic. We have navigated that pandemic, we have come out of it, and we have learned to live with it. From a macro perspective, I think it's safe to say that during our lifetimes we have all been witness to the great moderation, right? I think that's what economists are calling it these days, where for at least 20, 30 years, inflation has been at a historic low, and policymakers have been able to deliver growth while keeping inflation low. So in that context, I think we are seeing unprecedented economic activity today. I think it's safe to say that the next 10 years are going to be quite challenging, with delivering the economic growth and low inflation pretty much being the main challenge of policymakers globally, whether that be in Europe, in Africa, or in the US. I think we also cannot forget the geopolitics. The Russia-Ukraine war has triggered a rise in commodity prices, and that trickle-down effect across several places, but especially in Africa, where I think it's felt quite strongly. So with those broad themes playing out globally, I think we in Mauritius, as a regional and international IFC, we have a key role to play. I think a lot has already been said by Maurice and by Jan in terms of the new and innovative structures that we as an IFC have been delivering, and the strength of Mauritius as a destination of choice, and as a platform for funds, private equity funds, global funds, institutional investors, using Mauritius for investments in Africa. I think the context for this panel is looking very much into the future, new structures, what are we doing? I think it's important that we look back and think about what is it that Mauritius has already done to help Africa as a continent, and how we have been able to investments, whether they be from Europe, from the US, into the continent. I think earlier today the EDP director gave a very good review and about extraordinary progress of Mauritius as a country. But just to add to that, the global sector in Mauritius now houses over thousands of funds. We have numerous investor services funds, some of which are present here today, helping these funds set up the right structures which provide really the right setup and the profitable setup for these funds to be domiciled in Mauritius and really guide them through their lifetime while they go through the investment process and the exit process. I think it's important to note that many of the colleagues are here today that Mauritius has probably one of the deepest network of what we call an ecosystem helping funds to be domiciled and to prosper from Mauritius, whether it be law firms, whether it be accounting and auditing firms, we have consulting firms here today, advisory and corporate finance houses, but importantly, the banking system and the banking sector in Mauritius consists of over a dozen well-established, rated, global, well-capitalized banks who use Mauritius as a platform to help their global clients, but also clients who are transiting through Mauritius for their investments onwards. I think one thing we also forget as a small country sometimes is the deep pool of talent that we have in Mauritius, whether that be the fresh set of graduates that are either educated locally or abroad who come back to work here. We have professionals in this room today with decades of experience in the global sector in Mauritius, and I think that's quite unprecedented for a jurisdiction in Africa. And we also have the returning Mauritian diaspora and many Africans from the continent who have now moved to Mauritius and call Mauritius home and work, whether it be at APSA or local banks, local consulting firms, and even local investor services firms. So all these factors have led to what I would say a mature ecosystem in Mauritius of bankers, lawyers, consultants, service professionals, providing a really seamless service to the likes of yourselves as international and African investors who have chosen to domicile in Mauritius. At APSA Mauritius, we provide a full-fledged banking service. So similar to our counterparts in South Africa, we have a full retail bank and a full corporate and investment bank. So from transactional services, including consistent Pan-African online platforms for people to use. So regardless of where you are in the world, you're able to access our systems. Cash management with a deep network of correspondent banks. From an FX perspective, spot forwards, currency swaps, both across G10 and African currencies, and structured products, right, in these terms of turmoil, structured products which allow you to meet some level of minimum returns, but also as a liquidity measure. And financing facilities as a bank, I think is very important to forget, especially when it comes to funds that we provide specific facilities for funds to be able to manage their liquidity or capital calls. Just as the jurisdiction is innovating, we as a bank are constantly innovating, and I think one of the largest things we've done in recent years has been relaunching our custody business right here in Mauritius. In fact, it's been the relaunch of APSA both in Mauritius and in South Africa. It's a business that we precisely want to relaunch because we want to be nimble and we want to be able to provide a one-stop solution to funds domiciled in Mauritius. I think it's very important. The theme of innovation and disruption, sometimes we forget about it, but it has taken a toll on the world. It has moved many industries forward. It has left many people behind. So it's very important as a jurisdiction and as a bank and as industry professionals that we think constantly about how to innovate in our respective jurisdictions. I think in summary, for pension fund managers and alternative asset managers,
specialized licenses. So the asset manager would be a a specialized license, whereby you would not.
And legal constructs which are extremely business friendly. You would have heard earlier from the Minister and from the EDB Director. My fellow panelists have talked a lot about the set of tested and proven structures which numerous funds have used successfully over the years, but also innovative structures. Maurice called it yesterday a game changer when it comes to VCCs, providing efficient channels, efficient conduits for fund managers to deploy local and global capital via Mauritius to the continent. And finally, this deep, well-connected set of professionals who have translated all these advantages into actionable, efficient, and profitable structures for funds and corporates. And that's where we as Mauritian bankers, and particularly ABSA, as an African bank with a strong presence in Mauritius, we are excited to be here to act as enablers to you as stakeholders in the pension and investment sector in the